My journey into cryptocurrency investing has forced me to ask some very difficult questions that I've never really asked or really put really much thought in or energy into before, like what is money? How is money created? What are the effects of people creating money on my life? Like, why is there inflation? Why is things so expensive? How is this affecting my children and my children's children? And is there anything I can do about it? Like, is there anything I could do with these forces at work in the world about the whole money supply, and how can I protect myself? Well, in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you what I've learned on how money is created, and just as full transparency, I am not a financial advisor. I am not an economist, not some professor, not even a big brain. I'm just a lizard brain cowboy trying to understand and make sense of money and economics, and basically what can I do to protect myself. And if it's something that you're interested in, just follow along in this video closely. If you like this kind of content, give me a like button on this. And if you know a little bit more than I do, which is probably a lot of you, and you probably know a lot more than I do, leave a comment down below. It kind of helping me tease out and explain so that other people can read that comment, and it would be helpful to them as well. So let's just go ahead and get started here. And let's start right at the beginning at the US government. The US government wants to spend money on different things like the military, or infrastructure like roads, or government programs for whatever reason, whatever kind of government programs. Well, they have to raise money, and they do that using the United States Treasury. This is the guy who raises money so that the government and the politicians can decide how to spend that money. Now, how do they raise this money? Well, one way they do that is tax, raising taxes on you and me. This is a very dangerous thing for them, and they don't like to use this. Why? Because we won't vote them in power if they raise our taxes, okay? We won't continue to put them back into the government and give them a job if they raise taxes on us, and because we get upset when we have to pay more, basically. So that's really out. The second way they raise money for them to spend money in the government is by cutting spending, okay? And you and I know all about this, right? If we are overspending in a month, we cut back on eating out. We cut back on our subscriptions, and we stop that, right? And the problem with the United States government doing that is when they cut spending in different sectors or different areas, the people who were used to the money supply, that money faucet flowing into their face this whole time, when that faucet is turned off, they get upset and they don't vote you back in. So that's really out as well. Well, the third way is a way that's called bonds, okay? Now, if you don't know what a bond is basically an IOU that the government issues to say, hey, I'm going to pay you back this full amount in the future, and until then, I'm going to pay you little amounts of interest up until then. So let me give you a quick example. Pretend like you go out to lunch with your friend and you forget your wallet, and you turn to your friend and say, hey, friend, can you pay for my lunch? And he says, sure. And then you say, okay, you could pay for my lunch, and I'm gonna write this note, and I'm gonna give it to you at the end of 7 days, and every day until then, I'm gonna give you 50 cents, and so you're gonna earn interest on that, and then at the end of 7 days, I'm gonna pay you back the full amount of my lunch. So it's good for that person where they're gonna earn interest and get their money back, and it's good for you because you got your lunch immediately, right? Something that you needed immediately. And this is what the government does. In this metaphor, you, my friend who forgot their lunch, is the US government. And the US government takes that money, like they issue these bonds out to these investors. The investors give them that lump sum of cash so that they could spend money immediately on whatever the emergency or the need is at the time. And over time, they pay that investment back. And for a lot of investors, they hold bonds because it is a very low risk investment, because the person who owes you money is the United States government, and they're not necessarily skipping town anytime soon. Is this 100% of the time? Of course not. All investments carry some kind of risk, but for the most part, United States, like you could live with that as the person who owes you money. So back to our chart here. So they issue these bonds, which are basically these IOUs. And who do they issue these to? Who do they sell them to? Well, they send them to commercial banks, okay? So think someone like JP Morgan, right? Think Schwab, think Bank of America, think Chase, think Citi, think all these guys. These are the banks, right? And these banks, they get them from the government, and then they sell them to an entity known only as the Federal Reserve, okay? Now, the Federal Reserve, there is nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. They are not the government, and they don't have any cash reserves at the Federal Reserve. Okay, so just to clarify that, and the banks sell it to them. The banks sell them these bonds to where now the Fed owns these bonds. Right? We're going to put these bonds right here. The Fed owns these bonds from the government, and they cut them a check. They just say, hey, we're going to cut you a check, central banks or commercial banks rather, and so you're going to make a percentage off of that, and they're going to take that money and filter it back to the Treasury, who filters it back to the United States government, who then decides on spending it in whatever way they want, either the programs or the infrastructure or military or whatever it is, right? And there's so many others. Now, if you are asking the question, hey, where do they get this money from? That's the right question. And I'm going to go ahead and let the chairman, Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve, answer that question for you in this quick interview here.
Fair to say you simply flooded the system with money?
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally, and we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities, and that actually increases the money supply. We also print actual currency, and we distribute that through the Federal Reserve banks.
That's what they're doing. They literally are saying, he's literally saying, yes, we just print it digitally. We just make it up, right? We just print it digitally. We buy these bonds or these government-backed securities with money we just printed digitally. We just typed in the number, and that just happened. Could you imagine if I did that as a cryptocurrency? I made a cowboy coin, and it was worth $100, and there's like a million of them, and I just throw in a million more in my pocket, and these are now in circulation. It's like it's absolutely crazy. In any other sense, in every other economy, this would not be allowed. This would be a horrendous crime. But in the United States government, this is it, by his own admission. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at. But nevertheless, let's continue, okay? So this money is filtered up from the Fed to the commercial banks, to the Treasury, to the government to spend for us. Now, where does this go? Well, this goes to us. This goes to us, you and me, right? Not the United States, but that's us, all right? We get that. Now, where do we spend this money, okay? Well, we have to give it to where? The commercial banks, right? We don't keep it under a mattress. We go to these banks to hold, okay? Now, what do these banks do with this money? They loan out that money, okay? They are able to take your money and my money and loan it out to people for mortgages, for cars, for whatever else they want to do, for renovations. Who knows? They just loan it out. And who they loan it out to? Well, they loan it to you and me. They loan it to me and you and I and us. They loan it. This is us, right? Well, what ends up happening is this is a system called fractional reserve banking. And I'm going to give you a quick example, like a silly example, but this is one that how I learned about fractional reserve banking. Pretend like you wanted to buy a car from me, and you say, hey, Aaron, I'm going to buy this car from you for X amount of dollars, but I want to keep it at your house, okay? I don't want to keep it for myself, and I want to only drive it on Saturdays. I'm like, oh, okay, no problem. You keep it at my house on Saturdays. You pay me 100% of the total price of this car, and I'm going to keep it at my house. Well, what ends up happening is I'm going to sell it to 6 other people on the 6 other different days, right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, on these 6. So now I've sold it 7 times over, the same amount of car, 7 times over, to where it creates this impossible reality where 7 different people own 100% of the car. This is different from saying 7 different people own 1/7 of the car, like a part of the car. No, 7 different people own 100% of the car. And that's exactly what's happening here. In fractional reserve banking, they're loaning out the money, and they're loaning it out to someone else who then puts it in their bank, and they loan it out to someone else and loan it out to someone else, and it keeps on going out. And the banks only have to keep a small percentage in their of that total in their banks, but they don't even keep it there. It's all digital right now. And so they loan out, and it keeps on loaning out, and actually This is how fractional reserve banking do it, because all of these people have to go to different commercial banks, right? CBs, we're going to say commercial banks, and they put their money in it, right? And then they loan it out. So in this way, actually, this is how the majority of the money supply is created. Actually, 95% of the total money supply is created in this way: fractional reserve banking. They are literally just creating money out of thin air, right? It just comes out of nowhere. Okay, now I'm going to show you something which is a little funny. It's a quote from a book from the Boston Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Okay, in putting it simply, and they say this. It's from 1984. When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover the check. But when the Federal Reserve writes the check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it's creating money. So when I say the Federal Reserve is just cutting a check, it literally, I'm taking the verbiage from here. They're cutting a check that no one else, it's like, this is just made up money. When you and I have to work so hard, and we have to take out a second job and work more hours and create a new business and put all our risk at, and spend your time just spinning our lives away for fake, like, valueless declared fiat money, when someone else can just make the call to just create money. And it's at the Fed, it's at the federal level, and it's at the commercial banks level, where they're just allowed to, this whole thing is allowed to happen. And here's the crazy thing about it, is that eventually we're going to get taxed. And you and I are going to have to bring money back and pay the government, which, who do they pay again? They pay the people who own the bonds. They pay the Fed. They own the bonds. So now we're getting taxed, and we're now paying back the Federal Reserve for the money that we worked for, but they created out of nothing. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, we worked so hard for this money, they created out of thin air, but now they're paying it. It's a lot. Okay, this is a lot. And if I look at this is all one big mess. This right here is just a glimpse into the financial matrix. And the financial matrix is this, that the locus of power is in the Federal Reserve, the ability to just create money out of nothing. Okay, just to declare it, like, there it is. There's some value for you. Now, the question that remains is, what is happening here? The Federal Reserve is printing all this money. The central banks is going crazy with this stuff. Money is just proliferating. The money supply is about 40% right now, that in the last 2 years that it's been created. If there is an increase in 40% money supply, there's an inflation of 40%. It's very simple, in my opinion. CPI says, Consumer Price Index says, that it's only 8%. I think that's incorrect. Okay, I think that's incorrect. I think, just keeping it simple, I think they inflated the money supply by 40%. The value of our dollar goes down. The value of your house did not go up. Okay, you did nothing to it. Okay, the dollar value went down. The value of your dollar went down. That's why it costs more. That's why everything costs more. Food, gas, housing, everything costs more because of stuff like this. What can you and I do to escape this financial matrix? Well, that's where I think Bitcoin comes in, right? This is where I think cryptocurrency and Bitcoin comes in, because Bitcoin is just a complete unplugging from this whole nonsense. It's a complete unplugging. It's like being able to do business in a different currency that is not manipulated by the government, that cannot be created at a whim, cannot be, I should say not manipulated, because I think it could still be manipulated, and it is manipulated, but I'm going to say it cannot be created or counterfeited, or there's no single locus of power able to create more Bitcoin just like that, like they're doing the dollar. And so what happens is when people create the dollar, that inflation hits us as Americans. But even worse is that when it pours out, because the whole world is pegged to the dollar, it pours out to these other countries out here, and their inflation is crazy. You think 8% inflation is high? People out there, and you could, if you're in another country, please put your percentage rate of inflation down below if you're still following with me. Like, they're in the double digits right now. And because they're further away from that locus of power. They're not in America. And so it has to exchange so many hands to get to them. And so what Bitcoin offers is this ability for anyone in the world to unplug, to deal business in sound money and hard assets like Bitcoin. That's something that's scarce, that's valuable, that's the largest monetary network. Right now, it's only a matter of time till adoption. Now, I backed up off of the word manipulated, and I think that's true because the thing is with the word manipulated, it's like it's saying that no one can kind of like sway the price or whatever, and I think they can. It's still early, it's still young. People could, huge sums of money can pour into it, dropping the price or sell it or whatever. They could do all kinds of stuff. What can you and I do? Well, we could just buy and hold. We could buy and never sell. We could just keep buying little by little, dollar cost average, day after day, and after 10 years, after 20 years, we'll see where we are. If you stayed plugged into the financial matrix, is your life better or worse? Can you buy more or less? Because right now, the rate of promotions and increases of pay, it's not keeping up with the rate of inflation. That's why we got this whole mess. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. These are my thoughts. Leave a comment down below if you could kind of expand on some of these things. I'd love to read, especially through this video. Give me a like on this video, hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.